Well, friends, good evening and welcome. I want to thank you, each of you and all of you, for acknowledging the importance of this subject by deciding to give it your time, your energy, and your attention tonight. Thanks also to Ambassador Michael Molloy for his willingness to speak to us, and I'll introduce him properly in a few minutes. No, not a few minutes, a few more minutes. Particular thanks, first of all, to the Institute for the Humanities, to Samir Kanesha and to Sandra Zink, to the Wordsworth Chair and Alex Stebner, the Wordsworth Chair in the Department of Humanities, the Political Science Department and its Chair, Dr. Dominskis, the Canada World Program, when Shauna Silvestre, they were the ones who did the poster that some of you would have seen, and all of those groups are at SFU, and they responded to the invitation of the group that I represent, Building Bridges Vancouver, to co-sponsor this lecture, and I thank them for the financial, technical, and staff support which has made this event possible. Much appreciated. Just a word about the group that I represent, Building Bridges Vancouver. It's a public education program which began in 2008 and which showcases the visionary grassroots work of those who, through education, encounter, art, and community development, are trying to bridge the decades-old Israeli-Palestinian divide. Later in the evening, we'll be circulating a clipboard, and if you are not already on our information list and you'd like information about future events, just give us your email, and you will be notified. And now to introduce our speaker, Michael J. Molloy. He began his career with the Manpower and Immigration Foreign Service in 1968. He served us, Canadian citizens and taxpayers, in Tokyo 1969-71 and Beirut in 71-72. And his Beirut posting included 2 months as deputy head of the Canadian team sent to Kampala in Uganda to rescue Asians expelled by the dictator Idi Amin. In Ottawa, later, he was Director of Refugee Affairs from 1976 to 78, developing the refugee sections of the 1976 Immigration Act, including the Refugee Sponsorship Program, the first humanitarian designated classes, and the Refugee Status Advisory Committee. In 1979 and 1980, and he and I were just talking about this a moment ago, he led the Indo-Chinese Refugee Task Force, which coordinated the selection, transportation, reception, and settlement of 60,000 Indo-Chinese refugees in Canada. I wonder how many people here have had any connection with any of that refugee work. Okay, I see half a dozen or 8 hands. That's very good. He spent 81 to 89 abroad, first as the Canadian mission to the UN in Geneva, responsible for Canadian relations with the UN High Commission, again for refugees and the Red Cross institutions. A 1-year assignment in Jordan, 85-86 in Syria, where he established the first Canadian embassy. Returned to Canada in 89, worked nationally in refugee matters between 91 and 96, and here's a connection to our topic tonight. During that period, he served as advisor to the Canadian delegation to the Multilateral Working Group on Palestinian Refugees, part of the Middle East peace process. From 96 to the year 2000, he was our ambassador to the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and from 2000 until his retirement 3 years later, served as Canada's Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, responsible for coordinating the Canadian contribution to international work, again, on the Palestinian refugee problem. On retiring, well, I'm retired, and people have said to me, what's retirement like? And I said to them, well, if you can give me a definition of that term, I'll be happy to respond to it. And I've come to a couple of conclusions about retirement. One is retirement is freedom to make your own decisions, and then retirement is what you make it. And tonight we will hear something of what Michael Molloy has made of his retirement. So he co-founded the Jerusalem Old City Initiative, based at the University of Windsor, which is developing governance options for the future of Jerusalem. And it was this project which moved us to invite him to speak to us tonight. He's also president of the Canadian Immigration Historical Society and a senior fellow at the University of Ottawa's Graduate School of Public and International Affairs. He has been honored by receiving the Queen's Golden Jubilee Medal and from the Kingdom of Jordan, the Order of Al-Istiqlal, which means independence. I just want to give you three brief quotations to focus our thoughts as we prepare to listen to him. First, some words of an Israelite poet writing a couple of hundred years after Jerusalem's founding, which was 3,000 years ago. And it's come down to us as part of Psalm 122 in the Hebrew Bible. And it seems to be still very apropos. Pray for the peace of Jerusalem. May those who love you prosper, peace be within your ramparts, and prosperity in your palaces. And as Hamlet says in his great soliloquy, a consummation devoutly to be wished. Second, a quotation from one of the study documents that the Jerusalem Old City Initiative has produced. Quote, "The old city of Jerusalem and its holy sites resonate powerfully in the hearts and minds of Muslims, Jews, and Christians around the world. The Jerusalem Old City Initiative approach to the Jerusalem conundrum is to recognize the full range of factors that affect resolution, including security, symbolic importance of the Old City, the strong religious feelings of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, economic sustainability, the needs of the Old City's residents, and the interests of the Palestinians and Israelis more broadly." And third, finally, and more pointedly, from the same study document, if questions respecting the Old City remain unresolved, stability in Jerusalem cannot be assured, and peace between Israelis and Palestinians will be impossible. In a word, the city of Jerusalem, and within Jerusalem, the Old Walled City, it represents the Middle Eastern conflict in a nutshell. To give us some thoughts about the cracking of that hard nut, I now call upon Ambassador Michael Molloy. Thank you.
Not quite as high as I thought it was. To address the question about retirement, before I retired, I thought retirement is when every day is like Saturday. But I find retirement is more like every day is Wednesday. You can't remember the last weekend, and the future one is way right. How do I get rid of this up there? This isn't happening. Then what do you do? You push the that whole thing. I was born, thank you very much. I was born several years before they invented the ballpoint pen. And I've barely been able to master that, being left-handed and all. So these things really I'm absolutely delighted to be in the city of my birth and to see in the audience relatives and friends, and I hope new friends. To thank you very much for coming out on this rainy night. We came out here to escape the winter, and we had to. One of the things I always got mixed up was south and west. And next year, I think we'll try south rather than west. They've been through the winter. Now I'm told if I push the button here. This is a very interesting quote by Aaron Miller, who's, if you follow the peace process at all, was one of the architects of the American efforts during the time of the first Bush and during the Clinton years. And he sums up Jerusalem in those words. Jerusalem's not about sharing, it's about possessing. And I think that, in a nutshell, is the center of the issue. Just to tell you a little bit about who we are, as Donald said, I retired from DFAID in the year 2003, and my career had intertwined with two other guys, two Bells and two Mikes. In fact, we were originally called Mike and the Bell Boys. Michael Bell, four-time Canadian ambassador, twice to Israel, once to Jordan, and once to to Egypt. John Bell, a very distinguished Canadian diplomat and UN diplomat, and currently working at a prestigious think tank in Spain, and myself, an immigration officer who fell into the wrong column one day and ended up doing diplomacy. And we all became available, two of us through retirement and one through a career change in the fall of 2003. And we got together for lunch one afternoon and said, you know, what do you think we could do about the situation in the Middle East now that we are no longer servants of Her Majesty the Queen of Canada and are free to follow our inclinations rather than ministerial direction? And we kicked around the various issues and decided that we would take a run at Jerusalem. We were, in part, compelled to do this, first of all, by the fact that many of the other issues like borders and water and the electromagnetic sphere required a level of technical expertise we simply didn't have. But we were also inspired by what we saw as the appalling failure of American diplomacy in the year 2000 around the Camp David discussions that President Clinton led. We had heard rumors, which we subsequently were able to verify with members of the Israeli delegation, that they had arrived at Camp David without a single sheet of notes on Jerusalem and had to telephone back to a very good think tank in Jerusalem to develop options for the negotiations. And Arafat led on the other side. You can imagine if the Israelis didn't have, you can imagine what he had in his briefcase if he had a briefcase. And we had just come through a long experience where we had been chairing, or working on, all three of us, the Canadian contribution to the peace process a few years earlier, which was the Refugee Working Group, one of the most delicate and complicated issues there are. And man, the amount of preparatory work we would put into any particular meeting was amazing. And we would have no more thought of going off to discuss something as complicated as Jerusalem without a massive amount of preparation work than we would have flying. And so we thought, okay, well, perhaps by using what we've learned in our careers, we can make a bit of a dent where others have failed. Could we do better? And we felt, you know, even if we don't come up with a solution, if one of 100 of our ideas gets woven into a final status agreement, that's worth the effort. And we can, at the very least, leave a legacy of studies and research that will be of use to future negotiators on all sides. The other thing that gave us courage is that, I'll tell you about the process, but on our first trip to Jerusalem, we made a point of calling on religious leaders, the chief rabbinate, the various Christian patriarchs, and the Grand Mufti of the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And the Grand Mufti at that time was a very interesting man, and he was very busy in the day, so he said, drop by my house and I'll talk to you after work. So we arrived at a little tiny stone house with a little tiny stone courtyard late in the afternoon, and there was the Grand Mufti in his undershirt, and invited us in and gave us tea. Turned out he had very little English, but he had a really excellent interpreter with him. And he said, so what are you guys up to? Through the interpreter, of course. And so we explained that we were embarking on a study of Jerusalem. And he said, why? Well, why have you done so? And I said, and the interpreter was interpreting as we went along, and I said, well, we've all three retired. And as soon as that was rendered into Arabic, he said, aha! And then what we got back through the interpreter was, you are very wise as people men who just retired, to understand very clearly that the woman thinks she is the queen of the house, and you would be well advised to recognize that and get yourself projects to get you out of the house. So we feel that our project has been blessed at quite a high level on the Islamic side.